Welcome, everybody. Today is June, what is it, 27th. And I'm here with Tom Ryan and Barbara Engelhardt, his wife. I'm Kevin, Tom's son. These are some of Tom's memories, and today's topic is swimming. So take it
Yes,
away.
swimming was very important in the Ryan family, but it almost wasn't. Uh, when I was a boy and it was time to learn to swim, my parents were anxious that I would learn to swim because they were both dairy farm raised kids, and there wasn't any lake or water around their farm. And so they didn't know how to swim. And as adults, it's hard to learn how to swim when you're an adult. You have to be very, it's much more difficult than for a child. So they were worried. Anytime they were in a rowboat and it tipped over, they knew they would drown because they couldn't swim. And they were really afraid. So they wanted me to be able to swim so I wouldn't have that fear of the water that they had. And there was a glitch in Waukegan. The only pool that was available to the public was the YMCA pool. And YMCA stood for Young Men's Christian Association. It was a Protestant organization, private, and it would push. And the Catholic priest told us that they're going to get you in there to swim, and then they're going to convert you to their religion. And you don't want to go have your kids going to the Y. And so they were reluctant to do that, but they wanted me to learn to swim. And my mother was very Catholic. Both my parents were. And the act of disobeying the priest and sending me to the Y and joining me up was amazing to me. Now I look back on it. She really wanted me to learn to swim. And when we would swim there, it didn't cost very much to get in. They didn't really charge the full cost. And businessmen would join the Y, and they overpaid for their special treatment. And these men then were helping to support us kids. And the kids would go in the shower. Oh, by the way, it is all men. Women were not allowed at the Y. So we swam in the nude. And I think they were worried about germs in the pool, and they didn't have the chemicals and the pumps that they have now to keep the pools safe. So they made sure we were clean. Well, we're boys and didn't take baths regularly. So they got us in the shower, and then they would stand at the door. This is kind of a pedophile's dream. And they would take these young boys, 10, 11, 12 years old, and they'd come through a line and they'd rub your collarbone, because they could tell if you hadn't taken a full shower that the rolls of dirt would be right on that collarbone. And they'd turn you back. You go back in the shower and take another shower, because you have to be clean when you go in. So we'd finally all get in the pool and learn how to swim. And we'd line up along the guardrail in this pool, and I happened to be in water that was over my head, but I could hang onto the rail. And we'd swim back and forth, and the teacher would stand on the side and watch. And what I did when I was swimming over to the other side, I would reach out for the rail. Well, anybody who knows about swimming knows that if you put your hands up in the air, you'll go down, not up. And, when you see the picture of the guy, help, he's got his hands up in the air. Well, he's going to go down, his head will go underwater soon. If you want to go down to the bottom of the pool, you just clap your hands over your head and down you go. So that's what I did, basically. And I was underwater, and that teacher just dove into the water and came up, and he put his hands under my armpits and pulled me up out of the water. And, I would have drowned, but that's what he was there for, of course. It was embarrassing to me, to have him do that. But I learned to swim and at the Y, and those teachers were really great. So when I got older, that was one of the few sports that I enjoyed was swimming, and I wanted my kids to learn how to swim. So I taught during our camping mostly because we always tried to go to a lake or a pool at night when we camped, and so you kids could swim. You loved the water. Well, I taught you one at a time, each one to swim, and we would stand in water, maybe up to your waist, and then you bend over and you put your face in the water. And the first thing to learn is to not be afraid to put your head underwater and to be able to pull your head out and breathe and then put your head back in the water. You weren't swimming at all. Once you can breathe underwater, you're not breathe underwater, but uh, turn your face to get a breath and put it back under the water. And putting your head under the water doesn't bother you. You're not afraid anymore. You can swim. The rest of it is easy. And so we overcame your fear of the water, and then you
Oh,
started
can
swimming.
I tell a story?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
one of my earliest memories was as a kid, maybe 4 or 5 years old, just kind of walking down in the as the pool got deeper, uh, and we just my feet left the floor, and my butt just kind of went up, and so I was face down in the water and just enjoying things. I knew how to do that, but I can remember somebody just grabbing me and just pulling me out of the water. It's like, oh, you're drowning, or you're drowning, and everybody is really excited, and I was just kind of enjoying things, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, overcoming the fear of the water, and it's a natural thing. It if you can't swim, you don't want to be putting your face in the water, but it's the first step to learning how to swim because you definitely have to. You're going to be moving your arms and legs, and your face goes back and forth in the water, out of the water, to get a breath, and then you hold your breath, and so the timing has to be right. You have to hold your breath under the water, and once you learn to swim, it's automatic, and you don't even think about it. But it's a hard one to learn because it goes against your uh, guess your of how it should be and when it's dangerous. So each of you kids, I taught to swim, and the amazing thing was that every one of you kids could swim better than I could. You learned it so well that the teacher was outdone by the students. And I think that was an important learning. Very often teachers, you're going to find your students doing better than you do it once they get the hang of whatever it is you're teaching. So that was a good lesson to learn. And later on, we had a good friend, Mel Smith. I taught with him. We were both social studies teachers, but he was the swimming coach. And we called him the Great White Whale because he was always a little overweight, but in swimming, that wasn't a handicap. And he uh, he would be the coach in the summertime at the public pool. And Dan joined his team and was one of the swimmers. And and Dale McBride there with him, with Dan. He lived across the street, and they were about the same age. They were both on the swimming team. So Dan was probably the best swimmer of the four of you, and it went on to do it competitively. And I don't remember Dan competing in any other sport but swimming. Uh, I wasn't a bait sportsman and still not a big sports fan. And I don't think any of you kids are either. But that was his sport. He could swim better than anybody else in our family. Marilyn wasn't so keen on swimming. She didn't want the kids to see her kind of afraid of the water. And she didn't go in very often. And she'd stay behind and cook the meal. And so that when we got out of the water, all refreshed, and cooled off, she'd have a meal ready for us to eat at the picnic table next to the camper. And that would end the day with a fire and round the fire and around the campfire and ready for bed. And you were all tired by then. So that's, I learned a lot. That was a teaching job I had long before I really, well, I guess I was a teacher through most of it. You had the 90-minute lectures as well, but you did get to learn how to swim. I'm sure someone else could have taught you, but I wanted to make sure you could all swim. And there you are, up in Lake Michigan, Superior, Lake Superior.
Actually, no, this is down in Florida.
Oh, down in Florida. That's right. My folks had a cottage up in on Superior, Lake Superior, and they also there it is. There's the cottage. Ruth Meath married my dad, and that was Ruth's cottage. She was a single school teacher, but she had this cottage next to her brother and sister who had a cottage next door. But we'd go up there, and the cold water in Lake Superior, it's really way up there near the Canadian border, was cold water, but you could swim. Everywhere we went, we would try to go where you could swim. So we have lots of pictures here of the, I think this is Lake Michigan.
No, this is Superior at the cottage.
Lake Superior again. Okay, yes. Lake Superior.
And again, this
part of the Great Lakes.
This is Phyllis.
Oh, there's Phyllis. Yeah, that's my sister, my oldest sister, 7 years younger than I am. And she got married, and they had their honeymoon here at the cottage when it was empty. She and Jim Shoemaker that she married. But we went up there to visit the folks and enjoyed the water. I think this is at Devil's Lake, Wisconsin, early in our camping when we had the most primitive camping equipment, and Devil's Lake was pretty close to Waukegan, and we could get up there. And
even earlier.
Yes, before I was even married. This is the best man at our wedding, Tom Shack. He was my roommate, college, Army buddy, roommate at college, and then best man at my wedding. And that's me on the right and Tom on the left. And we were in the Dunes State Park in north of Waukegan.
He went on to live in Brigantine Island.
Right, he liked water too, and he was an engineer, but he started a business on the side selling equipment for people with boats, lights and electrical gadgets and so on. He had a catalog, so he lived on an island right near Atlantic City, Brigantine Island, and spent his life there. So I think this was, yes, in Monterrey, Mexico. That was our first trip to Mexico. And Monterrey is about 60 miles into the Mexico from the US border. And it's a industrial city. And they had this motel with a swimming pool. And there's Grandma, she went with us on that trip. And you kids were so little. And we took you all to Mexico. And we had a wonderful time. Enjoying that. Yeah, that's still in Monterey. You kids would go to the gate of the campground, and the campground owner would not let merchants come into the campground and bother his guests. So they would stand at the gate and lure you in by having these little puppets on a string, and they'd bounce the puppets and you'd go out and you got to know them, and they spoke Spanish, and you kids didn't know how to speak Spanish, but that was all right. They knew what money was, and you did too, and you would bargain and dicker with them to get the best price, and you bought a whole bunch of those puppets, and we brought them back, and you used to have puppet shows at Christmas time. It was a tradition to go. You guys all went down in the basement, and the rest of adults stayed upstairs and talked. And then when you had this play all set with the puppets, you'd call us down and we'd sit on chairs, the adults, and you would put on a show for us. And of course, this with the Haltemans, that could be 6 of them and 4 of you. You had 10 kids, and you had a good time putting on that show. But the puppets he bought in Mexico. Yeah, here's the Halteman kids. They were Joe and Irene's kids. Marilyn's brother, he was a convert to Catholicism and married a very Catholic girl that was a graduate of St. Scholastica. And she was, during May Queen time, they would have a procession for Mary, and Irene would play the part of Mary. She was elected by her fellow students. They were very Catholic. And so this is at a motel at San Luis Potosí in Mexico. And it was a very fancy hotel, but they let us set up our campers in the center, and the hotel rooms were all around the side. And we wondered why they'd let us do that. And I think we were the entertainment for the rich people, and they'd sit in their rooms and watch the crazy Americans down there in the middle of the place. So now this is when Dan, now this is Kevin and Dan, but this is when Dan started swimming in a public park team race. And so then we could go on canoe trips, and we went up on the way up in northern Wisconsin through a big chain of lakes and on the border between Wisconsin and Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
That was with Boy Scouts, right?
Well, I think, yeah, but that canoe trip was with 2 teachers and me. So there were 3 adults and you 2 guys, and with the 5 of us went on that canoe trip. You were teenagers by then, so there was you could do it yourself. You have to paddle your own canoe. That was a fun time. Yes, we liked water, and I'm glad that my mother disobeyed the priest, and it wouldn't be possible if she hadn't sent me to the Y. By the way, the Y did have an initiation, and instead of using a cross, a crucifix, they used a triangle, and each point of the triangle, and they lit candles, and we were initiated into the YMCA. It was a religious organization, but they never really bothered us about converting to Christianity, as the priest had worried. And they took us into the city of Chicago on a bus for a quarter, and we could experience the big city. And since we didn't travel much, those bus trips with the Y directing were wonderful. So I appreciated the Y as a wonderful organization in my development.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well done.